Hey guys, this is Matthew from Commercial Deal Junkie, and I'm going to be going over commercial property due diligence, the steps you have to do between getting the property under contract and closing on the property and making sure that this is something you want to close on. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Matthew Masood. I'm a commercial investor based out of Southern California, buying commercial property all around the country. I'm going to be going over what I do between getting the property under contract and closing. So this is my due diligence checklist, which I'm going to put a link in the description below if you guys want to take this. It's very simple. This is my under contract, what I need to do. These are all the important things to make sure that I'm actually buying a good deal, that the seller isn't trying to pull a fast one on me, and that I'm happy with the purchase. So most commercial contracts, they give you a due diligence period, whether it's residential or commercial, multifamily, retail, industrial, it doesn't really matter. For the most part, the due diligence is very, very similar. But so most commercial contracts will give you a due diligence period, meaning you have a certain amount of time in which you're allowed to request documents from the seller, look at the property, do inspections, do different kinds of inspections, do your homework. And if anything comes up during that time period that you don't like, you're allowed to change your mind and say, I no longer want to purchase this property. And you get your earnest money deposit back. Because once you get a property under contract, you have to put some kind of earnest money, typically 1, 2, 3% of the value of the property. You got to put it in an escrow account that would get applied to closing. But during your due diligence period, if anything comes up that turns you off on the property, you're allowed to get that earnest money deposit back. Once the 31st day hits, then now you typically your earnest money deposit is non-refundable. So you got to get to know all the details within that 30 days. And it's not always 30 days. With residential, single family homes, it's typically 15 days. With, commercial, it's typically 30 and 30 days due diligence and then 30 days to close. So 60 days total. Sometimes it can be 15, sometimes it can be zero. Sometimes if there's a property that has a lot of hype and a lot of interest on it, there will be no days for due diligence. And you're essentially saying, if I need to walk away down the line, my earnest money is non-refundable day one. Typically, that'll be a very hot market and a very desirable property. But as you can see here, buyer may conduct or obtain any inspections or re-inspections of the property at my expense. And for whatever reason I want, I can back out during this 30 days due diligence. Okay. So this is the stuff I'm going to pull out during these 30 days to make sure that number one, the seller isn't trying to hide anything or pull a fast one on me. And I know because once I take ownership of this thing, it is mine, especially with commercial. It's unlikely, like there's less recourse with commercial than there is with residential. They don't have to disclose, as much as they have to with residential. So you really have to do your homework. There's a phrase called buyer beware when that relates to commercial deals, where it's like the buyers are expected to be more sophisticated. Therefore, there's less disclosures that are required from the seller. Okay, so under contract. First thing I want a profit and loss statement from the seller. Now, this isn't always possible, especially with value add deals you're buying from mom and pop, unsophisticated sellers. The chances that they have in P&L are low, or sometimes they'll be super disorganized. I've had handwritten profit and loss statements before where someone literally just had a piece of paper and wrote, this much I collected $11,000 in rents, I had $600 in utilities, I had this. Goddamn fire truck. So you want to get a profit and loss from the seller for at least 2 years, but that's not always possible. And you have to remember, especially if you're buying value add, it's not always going to be possible to get the profit and loss from the seller because chances are there's value to be added. They're unsophisticated sellers. Next one is property condition report. I've pulled up a bunch of these so I can show you real examples of these as I go through them, and I'm not just giving you the list. So, property condition report. This is probably the holy grail of the due diligence period. You're getting an inspector that's going to go in there, look at every single unit. If it's a multi-tenant, look at the HVAC, look at the roof. They're going to give you an idea on how much this thing is going to cost you to maintain it or to renovate it to get new tenants in there or keep it up to date, or what kind of lingering capex items. Maybe the roof is coming to the end of its life. The AC units, are 20 years old, or the electrical system, which is a big one. Electrical systems sometimes go obsolete, where insurance companies won't even insure them anymore. I've had that where I bought a property, didn't know, my inspector didn't tell me that. He told me they were old, but they worked. But what I didn't realize is that the insurance company would not insure federal something Pacific panels. I don't know if you're an electrician, you probably know what I'm talking about. But these panels, they had a fire hazard. Let me pull up the inspection report here. I know I have this is an inspection report for the retail property I just purchased in Kansas, and this is the retail center. Now this is a short one because this is a newer property. A lot of the stuff were original, but it's a 1995 building, so there wasn't too much stuff in here. The roof is it's maybe halfway through its 40-year lifespan or whatever it is. There's some patchwork that needs to get done. Some these aren't sealed off real well, so I'm creating a list, which is gonna you'll see it down the road. I might as well mention it now, but down the road you're gonna see here is a property improvement plan or a PIP. This is most commonly used for, the term PIP is like a hotel term where the franchisees require PIPs from the individual locations, but I use it in my business all the time. Where I have property under contract, I do the property condition report. And while I'm looking at the property condition report, I have a PIP open that's saying these are the stuff that needs to get done. I'm taking screenshots from here, and I'm getting quotes on each one of those. We'll go over that into more detail. But for right now, it's going through the property condition report, and they go over every single thing in detail, and then at the end they'll have recommended what is recommended and what needs to be done immediately. So I'm looking for what are the big ticket items. All the way at the bottom here they'll have, okay, what is poor, what's a safety hazard. Obviously all the safety hazard stuff, you got a budget to get those done right away at closing. The things that are in poor conditions, you want to look through them, see what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. In retail, some of this stuff will be the responsibility of the tenant, or industrial or flex. In residential, this is going to be the responsibility of the landlord. So you go through this, and from the information here, you plug that into your PIP and start getting quotes. So this is the holy grail of the due diligence period for commercial real estate. Okay. So you're going to get that property condition report. You're going to interview different property inspectors and see which one has a good reputation, or ask other investors in the area on Facebook groups, ask who they use. The next one is the environmental report. Now, this is a deal breaker for real estate. Obviously, the condition report can be a big deal breaker as well if the property's in worse condition than you thought or worse condition than you underwrote. That could be a deal breaker. The environmental report is also a big deal breaker. I've lost deals because of the environmental report. What they do is they make sure that there's no environmental contaminations under the property. Soil contaminations. There wasn't like a previous gas station nearby that had a leak, or the property didn't used to be a waste disposal area or anything like that. So it's a simple pass fail that the lender will typically order. If you have a lender, they'll go in and they'll do the environmental report, and based off the property, it'll happen at different levels. So if it's, if there isn't a lot going on and if the loan's under $1 million, the lender will typically do what's called a desktop environmental report, which I have one pulled up here. It's essentially, is this a low risk, high risk, medium risk property? Have there been any incidents? This specific one, the property's down here. There are 2 gas stations here that had incidents, but were cleaned up several years ago. So those are no longer risks, and that the property is low risk. And anyway, these gas stations flow away. So even if there was a contamination, it would flow this way instead of flowing towards the property. So this was a desktop appraisal on this specific property, and it was low risk. If it failed and it was considered medium risk or high risk, then it goes from a phase 1 environmental to a phase 2 environmental. Phase 2 environmental, where they come out and they actually drill holes in the property and send them to labs and test it out. And then it's a conversation of who's going to pay for that. Environmental report can be anywhere from 10 to 20 grand, maybe even 30, 50, depending on the size of the property and how much samples they have to take and test. But the environmental report can be a deal breaker. Even if you don't have a lender will require this. But even if you don't have a lender, you should definitely still do a phase 1 environmental, even though it'll cost you a couple grand. Same thing with the environmental report, depending on the size of the property. It'll cost anywhere from 25 cents a square foot. Obviously, the bigger the property, everything scales. So bigger properties will cost less. I think this this inspection report costed me, I think, $2,000, $2,500. The environmental report, because it was a desktop environmental, it didn't cost me anything. Or the lender may have charged me something small for it. Anyway, that's the environmental report. The next thing is the new property tax. You got to evaluate, once you buy the property, it's very unlikely that the property tax is going to stay the same. Property tax is going to get readjusted. So you have to go into the county's website, figure out how the county calculates property taxes and what your new property taxes is going to be. So you can go to the county's website. With this specific case, the property was appraised at 1.164 million at the county level. This doesn't really say much about what the value of the property is on the open market. This is just what the county estimates the value of the property to be and what they will calculate the property tax to be. While you're here, you also want to make sure that the property taxes is completely paid up. Now, the title company will also do this as well. Make sure that there's no lingering property tax bills, and if there are, they'll charge the seller for it when they do their disbursements. They'll take that money and pay it off, which they did here. I bought the property when I bought the property, they actually made a payment from the seller for 29,000. So they took that from the seller and paid it to the county. So there's a zero tax bill due at closing. So you want to make sure that you want to go to Google, figure out how they calculate. If you simply go to ChatGPT or Google and how does Sedgwick County, this is in Wichita, so it's Sedgwick County. How does Sedgwick County calculate the property tax? You can even go to ChatGPT and go, okay, at $1,050,000 purchase price, what is the new property tax is going to be? And they'll give you a number. This is as easy as it's ever been these days with all the softwares out there to figure out what your new property tax bill is going to be, and make sure you plug that in, whether for the new triple nets of the property, if it's commercial, or with residential or with gross leases, you're prepared to make that payment and you've plugged it into your underwriting. Okay. Next, we have financing quotes. So at this point, once you get the property under contract, you're calling lenders or you get a mortgage broker and you start figuring out what your terms are going to be for your loan. How much down payment do you need to bring? What's your interest rate going to be? What's your amortization going to be? So you know how much your monthly payments are going to be for your loan. Now, this is typically going to be a soft quote from the lender. The lender won't lock in the loan until they're done with their due diligence. So they'll give you, hey, based off the rent roll and the P&L you sent, it's probably going to be 70%, 75% loan at a 6.5% interest rate, 20-year amortization. So you can take that, plug it into your underwriting, and now you know what your monthly debt service is going to be, and you can make sure you still cash flow on this property. You want to make sure you get your terms, talk to multiple lenders, and make sure that you're going to get good numbers and you can afford and still cash flow the property based off the monthly debt service to the bank. Next is the property improvement plan. We touched on this earlier. Let's pull up the example of the property improvement plan. Where is it here? So this is the PIP. Where is it? I just had it open. This is the property improvement plan where you create a budget and you start grabbing all the stuff from the inspection report that needs to get taken care of, including quotes. This is the time where you have the inspection report, so you start calling contractors or different companies and get quotes. So I have a folder here that has all the quotes for the property. So these are all the quotes that were collected during the due diligence period. Here's the quote for the parking. I know he needs to do parking. He needs to paint the building. He needs to add exterior lights. I got quotes, to clean up the landscaping, how much to paint the building, multiple quotes for multiple things. Like I didn't just get one quote for the parking lot. There's 3 separate quotes for the parking lot. Quote for the roof, patchwork. This is the parking lot repair and maintenance. I also want to get quotes for, cutting the landscaping, regular landscaping maintenance. And I'm trying to figure out how much is it going to cost to, number one, maintain this building on a monthly basis. But number two is clean the building up in a way where I can get higher rents. Luckily, this is a newer building, so the PIP wasn't too aggressive. I wasn't going to be drowning. There's only a $40,000 renovation on a $1 million+ building. Now, I'm still going to have money on the side for leasing. I'm still going to switch out the units, pay for a leasing agent to get different tenants in there because I'm going to be raising rents to market when I'm done cleaning up the building. And I also have capital reserves on the side. This is additional money this is, oh crap money. Something went wrong. Maybe we went over on budget and we need to spend more money. This is already pretty aggressive, the budget that I put. So I get my quotes. I create a plan on what are the things that need to be addressed. So building needs to be painted. The landscaping needs to be improved. Need to do exterior lighting. And a lot of the tenants have really poor signage. So we're going to pay to, put in LED lights and signage on the property so that the building looks better and attracts higher quality tenants. Okay. So this is also really, really important. You want to figure out how much you need to spend on the property in order to implement your value add strategy. Next thing is tenant interviews. I want to speak with all the tenants. Now, it really depends if this is a residential, let's say this is like a 100-unit residential building, you're probably not going to talk to all the tenants. But with retail, industrial, flex, office, you want to make sure you talk with the tenants. Hey, how do you like the building? Are there any issues with your HVAC? Do you plan on staying? How's business? How's everything going? If I fly out when the property condition report happens, I'll typically fly out to the property and I'll conduct my tenant interviews. I'll meet with contractors and I'll get a good feel on this property. Is this a buy that I feel comfortable with, or is this something I need to back out of? And there were more, hidden things than I was expecting. So I'll do my tenant interviews. Well, I'll get with the tenants. I'll also get my tenant estoppels, which is a one-page document. You give me a second, I can pull up a tenant estoppel here. It's really a one-page document. See if I can spell estoppel right. It's really a one-page document that says, what the tenant's understanding of their monthly rent is, when their lease expires, when's the last time they paid rent, what utilities they believe they're responsible for. So it's kind of getting the tenant's interpretation of their lease and what they've currently been doing, what they've currently been paying. So this is an interesting one where the tenants have been paying base rent, but they haven't been paying triple nets. Even though the triple nets are in their lease, the tenants haven't been paying triple net. So I know once I take ownership of this property, I'm going to start charging the tenants triple net because it's already in their lease. This guy's rent went from $1,000 a month to like $1,600 a month because there was $5 a square foot in expenses that they weren't previously paying, even though it was in their lease. So that I got from the tenant estoppel and the tenant interviews. It just gives you a clearer understanding of what the tenants believe is their situation with the lease. Next is insurance quotes. Now, depending on where you are in the country, insurance can be a huge factor to the deal. There are deals that I have lost and backed out of because insurance just came back ridiculous. So you're going to want to call a handful of insurance companies and get their quotes. They'll essentially tell you how much it's going to cost annually to insure this building. There it is. So I got a couple quotes, but the best one came from Progressive. It was almost exactly the same amount as the previous owner was paying. I think this one was $6,800 per year in insurance. It's going to be more if you pay it monthly. The annual is $6,854 if you pay it all at once. I go ahead and pay the insurance all at once for the year because it's cheaper than paying it on a monthly basis. But there are times where the previous owner was paying $4,000 in insurance annually, and then I got quotes at 11 or 12, and then I got to go plug that into my underwriting, and then I have one of two options. I can either back out of the deal, or I can go tell the owner, hey, this is what I'm getting quoted for insurance. Based on that insurance quote, this is how much I can pay for the property. But luckily, this insurance was actually reasonable. I had budgeted $7,500 for insurance. Quote came back at $6,800. So I was in a good position on this insurance quote. Next is utilities. You want to base the utilities, you want to base the P&L on actual utilities. So this is where I go to the landlord and I say, hey, I want all the previous utility bills. So once a property gets under contract, I'll send a lengthy email to the agent or the property owner if I'm dealing with them directly. Hey, I need P&L. I need to know what other issues you're aware of the building. I need the utilities. So I'll just go through here and see, okay, what do I need from the seller? I need a copy of the leases, which we'll go through in a moment. I need utilities. I need historical P&L. And I also want to have a conversation. Hey, what other things, what issues have you had with any of the tenants? What's the situation with the property? Are there any repairs that you're aware of that need to get done? And I'll feel the seller out. I'm trying to figure out why they decided to sell, what the situation is with the property, and what red flags I can get from the agent or from the seller so I could prepare myself when taking ownership of this property. Next is copy of leases. I want to get all the leases from the seller, and I actually want to read them. I want to go through the leases. I know I have leases here. There it is. Purchase tenants and then leases. So these are all the leases, 6 units. This was a 6-unit strip center, so I should be looking at 6 leases here, and I'm going to read through each of these leases. I have a whole nother video on deep diving leases and what you should be looking for, what are the key points of the lease. And then once you have all the leases, you want to create what's called a lease prospectus. What a lease prospectus is you're simply it's the way I do it. It's an Excel spreadsheet of what the current square footage is for all the tenants, what they're paying on a price per square foot, are they triple nets or not? So the question marks here were tenants that are triple net in the leases but aren't paying triple nets on a monthly basis, what the triple nets are, how much they're paying in CAM, when their lease expires, are they month to month, what's the total cost of the tenant monthly, what's the annual, and then any notes I have. This one had one non-performing tenant. This one had a tenant that's month to month because they didn't execute the renewal option. So each lease will have its own nuances. You want to deep dive and understand these leases really well because you will have to continue honoring leases as the new owner. You can't just say I'm the new owner. I'm going to create new leases with everyone unless they're month to month. You have to abide by the leases that were given and signed by the previous owner. And then on the second part of the lease prospectus, I essentially go into like what is my plan with this, what each unit, what I plan on taking their new rents to, and I have a little paragraph at the bottom. It's like what is the current net operating income, which would give me the current value, and what is the hypothetical after I finish stabilizing and I take these rents to what I believe I can take them to in a 2 year, 3 year, 4 year period, and what that will be the new value of the building. So that's a lease prospectus. You want to, based off reading the leases and going through them, going through each one of them, you want to create the lease prospectus. So once you have the leases, you should be able to finalize your lease prospectus. You'll have one from before based on what the previous owner told you, based on the rent roll that the owner gave you, and you're finalizing it based on the information that's in the leases. Next, you're going to finalize underwriting. With all this information now, you should be able to go into your underwriting and finalize the numbers. Now, before I go under contract on a property, I use expense ratios to estimate the value, to estimate the expenses. An expense ratio is just a number you plug into here that says based off the asset class. So this is a retail property. So about 30 to 35% of the income coming in is going to be going out as expenses. Now, those are reimbursable through the triple nets. So this is the triple net that'll be collected. So based off the triple nets collected, what are the expenses of the property? But once the property is under contract and I can actually do my full due diligence and figure out what I'm going to pay in insurance, what my landscaping bill is going to be, what the utility costs are. Once you actually have those numbers, you can go and plug them in and get a real estimated cost of what the costs are going to be of owning and operating this building. So once you have that, you can really finalize your underwriting and get an idea on what the value of this property will be when you're done with it and what the current value of this property should be. So for context, this property I was buying it at, they had it listed at 1.41. I got it under contract at $1,050,000. I ran my numbers on the current value. The current value was about 1.2 million. And then my stabilized value, my pessimistic stabilized value is 1.5 million. My optimistic 1.6 million. My optimistic value is about 1.8, 1.9 million. So this is, there's a lot of equity to be made in this deal based off finalizing my underwriting numbers. So this is a deal I felt comfortable buying after going through the due diligence. The last thing is a survey title review. You want to look at, depending on the size of this property, you may want to get a company to go out there and actually measure the building, make sure that the information that the owner gave you is actually true. This is really important for, retail, industrial. You want to make sure that the square footage is correct because that's what you're basing rents off of. If it's a, multifamily, you want to make sure that the units and bedroom count that they say is true. So you want to dive into the information that the city has on the property and deep dive, make sure that it matches what the owner's telling you. So you want to make sure that the most important thing for retail is the square footage. So here they're saying this is a 10,250 square foot building or 10,240 square foot building. You want to make sure that matches. This one was a little off when I measured the building. I measured it myself when I was there, and it was about 10,500 and change, which also made sense when I looked at the lease prospectus, which is when I had all the information on the leases. This is lease prospectus. So if you look up all the square footages that are on the leases, because every lease has a a square footage here. So if I simply, this is one of the tenants. If I, this is a 2,516 square foot salon lavish. So salon lavish, 2,516 square feet. So when I looked up all the square feet for all the tenants, it matched the actual square footage of the building. So the city has a slightly smaller square footage. It's not a deal breaker. If I measured the building and it was 15,000 square feet and the city only thinks it's 10, now I know something's wrong. Maybe they added a part of the building without, doing it properly and getting permits and all of that. Maybe the city just has a wrong idea of when the building was, the size of the building. But either way, I want to reconcile what the city says is the size of the building and what the leases are saying and actual measurements of what the size of the building is. I also want to make sure there's no easements, or if there are easements, they make sense. This one had an easement, but the easement just kind of made sense, and the easement favored this property. What an easement is, it says that like other people are allowed to drive through a specific part of the building for specific reasons. For like a utility easement will mean that utility companies are allowed to drive through the property without getting written permission every time. This one, 10248 West 13th Street. I'll show you what I mean by this easement. Wichita, Kansas. So this one has a property right behind it that switch to aerial. So this property right here, technically this strip right here belongs to this property. So this is the retail center that I'm purchasing. Technically this strip right here belongs to this property. Okay. But there's an easement that this property holds that allows the tenants and employees that at this property to drive into here and pull into either the front parking lot or the back parking lot. So there is an easement at this property that I realized during the due diligence period, but the easement favors this property. What you don't want is a property that has a ridiculous easement, like an easement that covers the parking lot or something crazy, or both of these tenants, let's say you own this and it was a very busy retail center, and now you have two different buildings with easements that are constantly driving through. Or, for example, this is an industrial building and there's a lot of trucks that are going back and forth and parking here. I've seen it all. Whether it's an industrial building and now they're parking their trucks, what's supposed to be an easement, but they're parking their trucks all over here. I want to make sure that the tenants are going to be able to come, tenants and employees are going to be able to come in and out without having issues. So that's the due diligence checklist. By the time you're done going through this, you should know whether or not this is something you still want to buy or this is something that you're going to pass on and back out during your due diligence period. You want to make sure that you're still doing it within your due diligence period because, like I said, once the due diligence period ends, you're essentially forfeiting your earnest money deposit. So this one had, I think, a $10,000 or a $20,000 earnest money deposit. As soon as we got under contract, I wired that over to the escrow company, and they held that while I did my due diligence. At the end of the due diligence period, I decide whether I want to continue with the purchase, and I'm sure I want to buy this building, or it's something I need to back out of. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Please make sure to do your homework when it comes to purchasing property. You're going to own this property. That's going to be your responsibility the day after closing. So you need to know what you're walking into. You need to be comfortable with the purchase. You need to have your quotes. You need to have your value add plan and make sure that there's no major liabilities that you're purchasing, like the environmental report. That could be a huge one. If you don't do an environmental report, you close on the property. And now this is a property that has some environmental contaminations. Now, this is more retail specific, although almost all of these apply for all other types of real estate. Some of them may change depending on the type of asset. Like environmental reports tend to be less stringent on residential properties, especially residential properties that are surrounded by other residential properties. Single family home, you probably won't even need an environmental report, and different things, the different properties. If it's in really bad shape, you'll have a really detailed PIP. You're not going to do tenant interviews if it's multifamily, most likely. But use this spreadsheet or use this checklist to help you and make you more comfortable on the purchase of the property. Now, this is by no means everything you need to do when you're under contract. It's a great starting point, and if you get through all of these and nothing really jumps out at you, there's a good chance you're buying a good property or a property that you could feel comfortable purchasing. Now, different asset classes will have different requirements. For example, if it's going to be a Industrial property, you want to make sure that the electrical is good. You want to make sure that there is enough power to supply the building. So different, you really want to deep dive and do your homework on your different your different asset classes. There's something else in here that I didn't mention that I probably should have, would have been rents, verify rents. So I'm trying to verify that, the rents that I believe I'm going to be able to achieve in my underwriting, I'm actually going to be able to get those. So I'm calling brokers, asking them what they think I can rent the building for. I'm looking and even visiting competing retail centers for this one because it's retail. So I'll even, call a local retail center that has it listed and say, hey, I own, whatever, and a barber shop, and I want to see the space. So I'll go in and I'll take a look at the space and go, okay, they're getting, they're offering 16 bucks a square foot. It's been on the market for this long. So I'm just verifying that I can actually get these rents here that I'm underwriting. So that's really all of it. You're gonna get the property under contract. You immediately got to start doing your homework. You've got 30 days. It's a sprint to make sure that this is something you are comfortable buying. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, do all of that stuff. Follow along. I'm gonna be going over the different things I do and how I buy property, and each one of these could probably each one of these could probably be their own video, and I've already made a couple individual videos on each one of these, but follow along if you're looking to buy or invest in commercial real estate. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you guys on the next one.